This is Boris Karloff speaking. I'm here with a story for you from the files of the Reader's Digest. This is the story of a house. 14 brides have been married in it. 2 silver weddings have been celebrated there. 20 babies were born in the upstairs rooms. The address? Well, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. For more than 150 years, it has been the seat not only of this country's executive power, but of an ideal of American family life. When it was built, a coat of white paint was laid over the gray Virginia sandstone of its walls, and from that day, the people of the nation have called it the White House. The plan for the White House was drawn by Captain James Hoban, an Irishman by birth and a resident of Charleston, South Carolina, who won a $500 prize offered by Congress for the best design, and time has proved it to be a noble one. 14 decades of whimsical fashion have passed through the interior, affecting furniture and draperies, but the house itself, though the oldest public building in Washington, has never gone out of style. The cornerstone was laid on October the 13th, 1792. George Washington, though, didn't live to occupy the house. Labor troubles, congressional slowness, and national poverty combined to delay the work, so that it was still not finished when in 1800 the Adamses threw open its doors at its first reception. Only 14 years later, this fine new first house of the nation was burned during the War of 1812. Fortunately, Mr. Hoban was still alive to guide the reconstruction after the war, and by the time the fashionable Munros entered it, a finer White House opened its doors. From then on it has gone through much the same evolution as other old American homes. First it was lit by candlelight, till Fillmore's day in 1851 when gas came in. Then, during the administration of Benjamin Harrison, the new sparkle of electricity. There have almost always been children in the White House. Tyler used to play forfeits with them in the Red Room. Jackson never tired of giving parties to the friends of his 7 grandchildren, and young Willie Lincoln drove his pet goats through the front door. Gaiety and sadness. In the white and gold East Room of the White House have lain in state the bodies of Presidents William Henry Harrison, Taylor, and Harding, who sickened and died in office, and of Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley, victims of assassination. And at such times the whole room has been draped in black, even to the chandeliers. There's been much debate on the subject of, is the White House haunted by all these voices from the past? In the daytime one isn't likely to think so, but late at night sometimes there does seem to be a feeling of the presence of other lives, and the American people feel the presence in the White House of those lives. So many of them faithful and strong, some few immortally great. We all say amen to the prayer written for that house by its first occupant, James Adams. Heaven bestow the best of blessings on this house, and on all that shall hereafter inhabit it. The story of the White House, which I found in the Reader's Digest back files, is, in a way, the story of life in these United States through the years since its beginning as a nation. But for a more contemporary view of life in these United States, you might refer to the current issue of the magazine, with a whole department of amusing, revealing anecdotes illustrating life in the United States today. I'll be sharing more of the stories with you, transcribed in the near future. But until next time, this is Boris Karloff saying goodbye. This is Boris Karloff speaking. I'm here with a story for you from the files of the Reader's Digest. This is the story of William Shakespeare's Hometown. From October to April, life in this ancient market town of Stratford-on-Avon flows as gently as the river itself. But comes the spring, and business booms. Long lines of pilgrims pay their shillings to see the house where Shakespeare was born, his mother's girlhood cottage, the property he bought when he returned as the local ne'er-do-well who had made good. Stratford-on-Avon is now second only to London, the chief dollar-making tourist haunt in Britain. But it took Stratford 250 years to wake up to its Shakespearean opportunities. In his day, Shakespeare's fellow citizens regarded him as a rather dubious blessing. To them, the theatre was a den of vice. For almost a century and a half, the only outsiders interested in Stratford were occasional scholars, and it wasn't until 1769 that a local landlord was able to rally his townsmen to a public celebration of Shakespeare's anniversary. That year, the great David Garrick came from London to organize a festival with cannon salvos, public breakfasts, and fireworks. There was everything except a Shakespearean performance. For 100 years, this kind of celebration prevailed. Local businessmen made a little bit of pocket money out of the visitors, but the town seemed destined to remain a big, dull village. It was saved from this fate by a bearded giant of a brewer named Charles Edward Flower. It started when, back in 1870, the local folk wanted to erect a monument to Shakespeare. Said Flower, "Shakespeare means plays, good ones. The monument we want is a theatre where people can come and see those plays." Flower scoured England to raise money for a theatre, but the London press and the bigwigs snubbed him. They called Stratford dull, forsaken, and said that its citizens were nobodies. Flower roared back, "We've waited nearly 300 years for the somebodies to do something. Now we'll show what the nobodies can do." He built a theatre with his own money, and Stratford was on its way. Other local citizens went to work to remake their once sleepy community, and they stripped from their homes, shops, and inns the ugly plaster fronts added in later centuries to reveal the fine timbered facades that lined the streets when Shakespeare lived. Fireplaces, cupboards, panels, beams, all the handsome Elizabethan details have been restored. And now the entire town is a living monument to William Shakespeare, shared by the plain folk of Stratford with the people of the whole world. I found the story of Stratford-on-Avon in the Reader's Digest back files, but in the current December issue of the magazine, there's the story of another small city with a big list of visitors. The city of this story is in France. The attraction, not a man, but a cathedral. The cathedral was built many centuries ago by the whole town. Men and women pitted the slight strength of their bodies against the heartless weight of stone to bring heavy limestone blocks from the quarries 7 miles away into the town. Stone by stone, year by year, the church rose. The style in which it grew was new then, the soaring style of the pointed arch and the flying buttress which today we call Gothic, and the town, Chartres. The whole story of the miracle of Chartres, the building of the Christmas story in stone, appears in the December issue of the Reader's Digest. I'll be joining you soon again with more transcribed stories, but until next time, this is Boris Karloff saying goodbye. This is Boris Karloff speaking. I'm here with a story for you from the files of the Reader's Digest. This is the story of the most versatile of all living substances. It has held man in his cradle, it warmed his hearth, it will make him his last long home. This is the story of wood. When living, a tree sweetens the air where it breathes. It lays the dust and tempers the wind, and when it is felled, sawn, and seasoned, it lays bare the hidden beauty of its heart in figures and grains more lovely than the most premeditated design. Touch any object made of wood, the tabletop of bright maple, the chopping bowl of cleanly birch, a paddle wall of knotty pine, the lean strength of an ash rake handle, or a tobacco pipe of briar. Pass your fingers over this wood, then press your full palm upon its firmness. Compared with metal or clay or stone, it still seems warm, still living out its useful days. Wood has gone into the very fibre of our nation. With the 1,000 and more native species of trees, the United States started out with the greatest forest heritage that ever fell to the lot of a lucky people. Our first exports back to England from the Jamestown colony were from the forest. Mighty pines for masts, pitch, turpentine, black walnut. When British shot fell back harmless from the live oak sides of the frigate Constitution, then she got her name Old Ironsides. And when the backwoods boys fought beside Robert E. Lee and their homespuns died with butternut, they were known as butternuts. The cabin where Lincoln was born was made of the logs of that grand old tree, the American white oak, and the rails that he split were black walnut. Wood fired the racing steamboats on the Mississippi and fed the first railroads. We spanned the treeless plains on ties cut from eastern forests. On rims of hickory and spokes of oak, pioneers rolled west to the Pacific, and there new woods came to hand. Redwoods and Douglas fir 300 feet high, timbers such as man had never seen before. Form and plan are in the very structure of wood from the moment that it begins to grow. It can overcome obstacles, split rocks apart, and travel far in search of water. It can adjust to circumstances. It can endure with an immortality all its own. Wooden piles under the streets of Venice have been found intact after 1,000 years, and white cedar in the swamps of eastern Virginia has lain buried an estimated 3,000 years, yet is now being dug up today and sawed into boards that may last another 1,000. Say, if you like, that wood has no thoughts and no tongue to speak them, but let him who says this look into his own heart and produce for us a thought that will warm the hearth of a friend or endure 1,000 years. I found the story of trees in a back issue of the Reader's Digest, and there's an article in the current December issue describing a very pleasant way of looking at them, 3,184 miles of them to be exact, all across the American continent. Thousands of people contribute to this journey. An army of maintenance crews, signalmen, dispatchers, electricians, butchers, pastry cooks. For this particular tree-watching device is a veritable super hotel on wheels. It is, of course, a streamlined train. There's a whole article about the Century and the Super Chief, both top streamliners, in the December Reader's Digest, and it's a fascinating one. I'll be joining you soon for more transcribed stories from the Reader's Digest, past and present. But until then, this is Boris Karloff saying goodbye.